When I look back in retrospect at a time like my relatively quiet time with Don, I realize that the peacefulness was a great blessing. I was about to go into a time of chaos, when rest would be so remote I couldn't even contemplate it. My coming together with Pete marked the beginning of great upheaval in virtually all aspects of my life. It was now 1965, the beginning of that year. Months before, when Don and I were sort of in the process of separation, we'd been sitting with a few of the folks next door at the little art studio when a small group from California stepped through the door. They came, of course, with news of the scene on the West Coast, specifically San Francisco. They informed us that there was a new word being used to describe us who were known generally as beatniks. The newly coined word they shared with us was hippie. Hippie? We all played with the odd, funny word, rolling it around on our tongues and laughing. Hippie. Where'd they come up with that one? Was it because we were hip? Who knew? They came and went, and we forgot about the new word and went on with our lives. I remember another moment during that same time period, walking downtown when a couple of seemingly Star Trek teen girls looked at me with an expression of awe and asked, "Are you a beatnik?" Wow, I must be, if they could see it. I couldn't help but smile and say, "Yes, I am." That identity mattered so much to me. I felt I'd arrived if strangers could look at me and see me instantly as a beat chick. When I first heard the word hippie, little did I know that 40 years later I would refer to myself as an old hippie of the first day, with boundless gratitude and love. To reach such a place in my life, I would travel through many mazes. For now, I was Pete's girlfriend. I'm not quite sure when the word old lady took the place of girlfriend. I think that was a little later, at least in Denver. We soon had to leave the big comfy house, and we moved into a storefront the boys were using as a music studio. It was 1965 now, and the music world was entering the end of the era of the electric rock band. And the Carpet Alley Boys and Pete wanted to become one. It didn't go anywhere, but for a short time us girls slept on mats in sleeping bags in the little studio with our cats and listened to them work at the new sound. Then Pete and I moved with John, the Carpet Alley washed-up bass cat, and his chick Hillary, to a small apartment a couple blocks up from the Spider. We all still hung out there, but the Spider too had changed. It was now owned by a feisty chick who drove a brand new Jaguar XE and whose idea of a coffee house was more that of a club scene. She started putting on little plays instead of jug band music. Everything was different. It was a period of kind of drifting between eras in a way. We were still in the big white house when we put a 45 on the turntable and heard the Stones belt out Little Red Rooster. And that pretty much knocked our socks off. It was there, too, that I stood over the toilet bowl and without a thought dumped my Ortho Novum birth control pills down and flushed them away. Pete and I were young and beginning to talk of marriage and babies. Marriage and babies. Neither of us ever gave a thought to what those two words meant. We'd never done either, but I guess we were bored and thought it would be fun. We hadn't been together 6 months. We had no income and no real interest in anything tedious. There wasn't one particle of the practical in either one of us back then. Sometime in spring we married at a judge's home. My mother must have set that one up. Only my parents and our friends Kim and Jane were there. I wore a turquoise sheath dress, and Pete borrowed some dress clothes from John. It was when I was actually saying vows there in the living room of the Justice of Peace that I knew I was lying. I wasn't in love. None of this was serious to me. My parents took us out for brunch after the little wedding ceremony, and Pete and I moved into a small apartment of our own, which his parents paid the first few months' rent for. It was a furnished apartment.
Sorry.
Give Daddy time here. Done. Okay, it was a furnished apartment, so we didn't have to scramble to find furniture. Pete was working at the time as a chauffeur, and I read books and hung out with friends. One evening I looked into the ashtray and noticed that all my cigarette butts were more cigarette than butt. They hadn't been tasting the way they usually did. Why? Slowly, as I contemplated those long ends in the ashtray, a thought emerged. Could it be? Really? Maybe. Did I mention earlier that I had never managed to get high, even though I'd been smoking pot for quite a while by this time? Even my one little peyote experience had seemed more forced than anything else. I wasn't at all sure I hadn't conjured my vision up just to have something I could share with Don. But choke my heart out, I couldn't get anywhere at all with pot. I really thought everybody who sat around the living room commenting on how wasted they were was just trying to be cool. I really didn't believe there was such a thing as high. So when it happened at the same time as I was contemplating the weird taste of my Camel Straights, it came as quite a shock. The realization that high was not just a word people used to be cool came as I sat cross-legged above my head, looking down at myself sitting there on the couch. I'd been home alone in the middle of the afternoon when one of our friends had come by to see Pete and had decided to invite me to share a fatty, just us two, since Pete wasn't there. Once seeing myself down there, of course re-entry was swift. And before I'd had time to process what had happened, there was another knock at the door. A girl who'd been over the night before wanted to try and find her earring, which she figured to be somewhere around or in the couch. She and I were on our knees peering under the couch and running our fingers through the pile rug when it turned into high grass, and a whole little grassy world with two giant people looking in became my new reality. This brought on my first pot giggles, and for the rest of the afternoon everything was funny. From that day on, I never had any trouble getting high. Some kind of iron barrier had been breached by a change in the subtle hormonal balance of my pregnant body. My cigarettes tasted awful. I was higher than a kite. Reality had shifted. I was pregnant. Yikes. One morning, Pete and a friend and I were walking toward the diner for breakfast when everything went black and I started to fall. The two cats grabbed me on either side and dragged me into the spider, where whoever was there quickly brought a sandwich, and I managed to scarf it down and pull my transforming self back from the abyss known generally as the first trimester. My own first trimester would be no picnic. It wasn't only my biological self that would change. My entire reality was in for a shift of major proportions. Yeah, shall I stop there?
Keep going.
Okay, so now we enter another section of the book called Going Off the Rails. Spook was 17. He'd come down from Aspen several times when we lived in the old apartment. Spook and I had exchanged furtive glances, and I found him beautiful. He was a low-key, soft-spoken boy with enormous gray eyes that I found my heart swimming in. I hadn't seen him for months when he knocked on the door. Pete was working, and Spook asked me to go out with him and a friend who'd driven him down. They wanted to go take in the summer sun at the park. Off we went. We sat under a shady tree, and Spook, in his quiet way, told me he loved me and wanted me to leave Pete and be with him. My mind reeled under the weight of his words and their meaning, but in those moments I was determined to go with him. I didn't want to wait. I wanted to go back to Aspen with him when he left. He was reluctant to take me off so quickly and stealthily, but I guess I feared it might never materialize if I didn't go then. And finally he agreed. It was all set up. He would be there quite early next morning, waiting, and I would sneak out while Pete was sleeping. Deception. Now you may think, what was a 21-year-old pregnant wife doing running off with a 17-year-old who still lived at home? All I can say in my extremely shaky defense is that while my birth certificate spoke clearly to my being 21, emotionally and in every practical sense, I was no older than Spook. Anything resembling maturity would come slowly and at great cost to myself and others in my life. I did what I felt within a moment's time, not only within that moment, but in moment after moment as they came along. I was swept by tides, a rolling stone. Now I would gather a few precious things like my framed picture of Jack Kennedy walking on the Hyannisport beach and try to tiptoe down the flight of stairs that led to Spook and whatever lay ahead. And even though I dropped the entire bundle down the stairs before me, Pete slept on, and within moments I was gone. It's hard to tell this story because it really is so heartless. Some things, many, are hard to look at even from a great distance, or perhaps especially from a great distance. Certain things are hard to look at. Everyone wants to think, I'm a good person. Pete was a good man. If ever a man didn't deserve to wake up and find his young pregnant wife missing, that man would be Pete. But I hadn't been in love. I hadn't felt my heart palpitate. No butterflies in my tummy. I hadn't been in love with Bob or Don either. Emotional dependence doesn't stand a chance when it finds itself in a face-off with that completely irrational thing, romantic love. It isn't love at all, of course. Romantic love is the most unstable feeling within the heart. And I had read Anna Karenina. You'd think it might have come to mind about now. But no. Nothing but those big gray eyes and that soft, silken voice came through the channel. I was quite simply a goner. Making out furiously in the back seat of his friend's car, off we sped for Aspen. The Righteous Brothers and the Lovin' Spoonful sang us along, and several hours later we pulled up in front of a lovely old Aspen house and walked through the front door. Mom came home in the late afternoon to find some unknown girl there with her son, who, by the way, was supposed to be going off to art school in Massachusetts in a matter of weeks. We planned naturally to both go, but Mom, she had other ideas. She promptly pulled her wayward boy aside and made it clear that he would be going to school and the girl wouldn't be tagging along. She was very discreet, Not one word did I hear between them to bring me discomfort, but the effect of her words, on the other hand, made up for her discretion in saying them privately to her son. I could spend the night there, but tomorrow he must send me back to Denver. No uncertain terms about it. Shall I stop? Or go
If you
on?
feel like that's a good ending, I was going to wrap it up soon, so if you feel like that's a good ending, we can stop it there.
Okay, we shall stop.
Okay.